But yes, this community, a lot of the food that we use at Myriel is from this community, and it's so, you all, people who make this community really inspire what we do at the restaurant and really have inspired me to do what I've done with my life, and that is to be a chef. I saw, this is kind of where I learned that there's power in food and bringing people together, and that you can love people through a well-set table and delicious food. And so I just want to quick show you a little clip of something. There's actually a documentary that was filmed in this, part of it was filmed here in Dassel, and it talks about a little bit of my journey in becoming a chef, and you'll notice a few familiar faces here too.
Well, Mom called and said, you better come down here and see this.
Yeah, well.
Wow.
That farmer is Clint Sherby.
Property. My stepdad Dean grew up here.
This is beautiful.
They used to cross the lake in the wintertime because there was a schoolhouse on the corner over there.
Yeah.
That's where they went to school. And then eventually they bought this farm, and this was their main dairy farm. Dairy operation kind of slowed down and then eventually stopped. So the land sat for, I don't know, several years. We rented out some pasture area, but the fences were all falling down. So I moved back about 6 years ago, and we decided that we were gonna do something with it rather than just kind of let it sit. So, you know, I'm not trying to expand into some big commercial operation. It's local, and you know where your food's coming from, and they're primarily all grass-fed. There's not a bunch of random antibiotics and things like that.
So. Obviously, as I move towards opening a restaurant, I'd love to kind of keep in dialogue with you guys, because I love what you're doing, I love the way you're doing it, I love this community.
We take care of
I love it.
All right, you can stop that one there. And then there's one, if you'd be so kind, there's just one more little spot that I have to show you. Some of the people in this room are in it. And you had something that we talked about.
Come before you and give you honor and glory for your goodness and mercy to us. And Lord, we thank you for this wonderful food that you have provided and that Karyn has prepared, and for the fellowship around this table. And so, Lord, bless this meal. May you be glorified by it. In Jesus' name, amen. So, Karyn, this is your great-grandma's recipe for these rolls, which would have been served at this table for generations.
After school, we'd stop here on the way down there, and we could always come in and smell. Grandma was cooking her buns or rolls or cookies or bars or cake or something. And then we always had those with fresh homemade jelly on them, with a glass of milk.
Yes.
Here's Grandma's apple pie. I always do each one by hand, just the way my grandma did. And her hands were so arthritic that I think it kept her from overworking the crust. So I learned from her, and I think she had such a light hand with it that I just have to do it that way now. It's kind of a little ritual.
A few years ago, we asked for the pie crust. He was over where we live. That's where it happened. After he got ran over, he broke his pelvic in 3 places. Ribs and everything. And he crawled to the tractor and got back up on the tractor and drove back up to the house here. And he survived.
You got run over by a hay wagon, didn't you?
Oh yeah, we all done
It's like you're right at
All right, that's good, thank you. So you can find that if anyone wants to watch the rest of it. It's a little 30-minute documentary. It's on, I think it's available on Hulu and on YouTube. It's called A Woman's Place, and it was really beautifully filmed, I think. And you'll see a lot of shots from Dassel, and it's very special to me. And that was at my great Aunt Shirley's house, which is also a special place to me. So here we are talking about sustainable cooking and eating. And one thing that I want to do tonight is to kind of talk about some practical tips and what that looks like and then also how it's connected to that. How I think a lot of times when we're talking about, we even hear the word sustainability, you should live more sustainably, you should do these things. It sounds kind of like a list of rules or a chore or something, but really what I want to talk about is how this is a whole way of looking at life that people were doing for so long before us, our mothers, our grandmothers, our great-grandmothers, and it really is so interwoven in community that it's a very special thing. So anyway, what do we mean by sustainable eating and cooking? Does this work? Can I just do that? All right. Technology has its limits. All right. So, but basically what we're talking about with sustainable cooking and eating is relating to food in such a way that we are reducing waste by cooking with the season, cooking whole things, and using everything. So that means that the sustainable part means that it's sustainable for us to function that way now, and it will be for generations to come. So really, when you hear that kind of description, that sounds exactly like what was happening for years and years and years in this community. I mean, I hear stories about, I wanted to serve that lardo, which I made a little bit fancy, like the way a chef would do it, but I remember stories of people eating lard sandwiches in the Great Depression, getting a whole hog and cooking the meat and potting that meat, doing these things. These are not fancy new practices. This is really what people did for a long time before we all of a sudden had luxury. Another thing, I think that it can sound, sustainability, conversations around that can sound sometimes like you're maybe getting into politics or making more statements about things than you really are. But I think that, when people talk about saving the earth or doing good to the environment, another way that we can think about that is stewarding creation, what God has given us. And really, what we're talking about is just being efficient and not wasting. And so that's really kind of underlying everything that we're going to talk about today. And it really was around World War II and after World War II when this kind of started changing. I mean, that's when you started afterwards seeing more cans in grocery stores. There was more globalization. People started importing all sorts of things. You could get pineapples, and you could get, and not in a can either, you could get all sorts of things that just normally weren't really available around here. You started to see meat cases full of your kind of the nicest cuts of meat. And now you have young people who are afraid to touch raw meat, or don't know what to do, don't really know where it comes from. They don't know where a T-bone comes from. And that's all kind of happened since after World War II, and technology grew, and we were able to do things a lot differently. So now we actually kind of have to make an effort to go back to the way that things were, because we're realizing that it causes some problems if we kind of continue living in that luxury mode with our food. So next slide. Why does it matter to think about this? Josh, could you? Busted. No.
It's okay.
Thank you. And also you'll notice that is a shed by Dan and Becky's farm. And the picture before was my grandmother, Jeanette Tomlinson. So it matters to think about this, and I'm not going to go into great detail. You guys know about this way better than this city girl does. But it's better for the land to use these practices. There's less waste from excessive packaging, excessive transportation, and getting food from a long way off to you. It cuts down on the demand for large-scale farming that really depends on a lot of chemicals and other things that just are generally unhealthy, and we're finding creates problems, and problems for the soil and problems for us. It's better for us because when we're kind of making all of these modifications to food, it really takes away a lot of the nutrients that is designed to help us in the food that we eat. When we eat foods that are in season and that are grown in good soil and haven't had to travel a lot farther, it just is better for our health. There's more nutrients in them. And I think there's more joy in cooking and eating this way. For example, one thing I always look forward to in the fall is apple pie. But I have to wait to make that apple pie until the apples are in season. And then I can stockpile a bunch of apples and then use them throughout the winter. But I'm often tempted to get apples, in the middle of the summer when I'm out of the years before and it's not time for harvest yet in that year. And I've certainly done that. But it's kind of more fun, isn't it? It's more fun when you have to wait for something. And that's just one simple example of how it actually, especially in Minnesota, where we have 4 distinct seasons and a really long winter, we've kind of got to embrace the one that we're in, and we have to have things to look forward to. I also think that limitation brings about creativity. So whether that be your budget or whether that be what's in season, those are some limitations. And if you look at it, some of the best loved food traditions around the world come from times of need or come from people getting really creative about some kind of limitation they had. For example, casseroles. Casseroles are a way to really stretch food out because there's always some kind of a starch involved in that. But they're so comforting and it feels like you're eating a hug when you eat a casserole. Barbecue, that's another example of something that by cooking meat, stewing meat for a long time and then putting it into a sauce or slowly roasting it, you're really able to use cuts that they kind of need some low and slow cooking, if you know what I mean. They're a little bit tougher, and then those sauces can really cover a lot too, and that's sometimes why people have developed really flavorful sauces. A couple other examples, charcuteries, sausage, Spam. Like that's basically a modernized version of pâté grand-mère, which was a French grandma charcuterie. It was basically a French grandma trick to use all of something in a piece of, in a hog. And so you would use organs, you'd use all the tough cuts and grind it up and put it into something delicious. Coq au vin, a fancy French dish. You pay a lot for it if you go to a restaurant, but it's a way to basically cook a rooster. And exactly, and it's become this elegant tradition now. And a lot of pastas, if you think about it. That's a lot of starch, and then you're using preserved things like maybe tomatoes, so on and so forth. So all these things are examples of time-honored traditions that come from people just working with what they had in the season that they're in. So, what does this look like practically? I'm going to tell you a little bit about, and we can go to the next slide, how we handle this at my restaurant in the city. Yes, that's a hog that I was butchering, from Paul and Megan Johnson in Cochon. So the way that we do it in our restaurant is that we plan around our limitations first. So we plan around our vegetables, proteins, fruits, and things like that have a limited season. And I also think, okay, now what can I find in the area between Cokato and Hutchinson? That's kind of because I'm often out here. I'll come out here about once a week and pick things up. And I think, all right, I'm going to make one trip, and what are all the things that I can gather that are growing in that area and that I can bring back to my restaurant? So I kind of start from there, and I start from the ingredients that I'm most excited about. A hog from Paul and Megan, or a young steer from Mariana Nyquist, or beans from the Nimalas. There are all sorts of things that I've been really excited about. Those are just to name a few. There are many more. So anyway, we start to think about planning dishes around that. So obviously we need to add some ingredients to make them interesting dishes that people want to have at the restaurant. But that's where we add dried grains, legumes, and preserved ingredients from previous seasons, to make really interesting dishes. So that's how we do it at the restaurant. And I think that actually really applies to how you can do it at home too. So let's go to the next slide. All right, so at home, I think you can plan your meals around things that you can grow or find right in your own community. And many of you I know are already kind of doing this, but just know that there's someone who lives in the city whose job it is to make food and make people happy with food, who is really excited that you are doing this. And I hope that this will help just to kind of acknowledge this order of prioritization. So think first about what you can find in your own community, or what you can grow on your own. Second, you buy local items in season. So for example, if it's not something that you grow, you could pop over to Dan and Becky's Market, or maybe one of your neighbors are growing something or have something, and that can kind of add to your log of things that you can work with. You can split whole proteins with family or neighbors. And I will add here, I think that we could all learn a little bit more, many of us could learn a little bit more about the offcuts. There are lots of things that people assume have to be turned into ground meat that don't have to be turned into ground meat. You just have to learn what muscles work a little bit harder, and then what needs to be maybe stewed or turned into, you can use it to turn it into sausage, of course, but there are just a lot of possibilities of how you can use things. I'm not going to go into that tonight. Maybe that can be another talk sometime. But there also are a lot of resources online, and the friendly people at French Lake also do a lot of that for you too. So you've got great resources out here. And I would say, for example, you could Google, just try Googling pork trotter recipe. And I promise you'll be just bombarded with all sorts of ideas of what to do with pig feet. It's true, a lot of people have loved them. It is not what I grew up eating, but I also didn't grow up eating lardo and cured eye of round or anything like that, but now I've come to love it. Some of it is just, you have to sort of get used to new ideas and think about them as treats and delicacies, even if maybe it's a little out of your norm. But it really makes sense. The reason why I'm talking so much about using whole animals is because you all know what it takes to raise animals. It's no small task, and I think that it honors the animal and the process that goes into it to really use everything. And you can feed, so that competition that Teresa talked about, Cochon, I cooked for 600 people at that competition using one hog. 600 people. And I did different dishes out of it too. So I used everything. I used the blood, I used the bones, I used the liver. I actually made pork liver ice cream. And people liked it. I did win. But anyway, and definitely used all the fat. That's why I made popcorn with pork fat today. Don't throw that stuff away. You can use all of that. And that's one way of getting a little bit more nutrients in. And then you're not buying as much oil that goes through processes that aren't always the best. And so I'm a huge advocate for using animal fat. Anyway, so using whole animals is a huge way that we can kind of get into more of a sustainable system and not waste. So anyway, I could talk about that all day long and I won't. I'm going to keep going. So so if we're already talking with our neighbors and family about splitting animals, then you stock your pantry with versatile, dried, and long-lasting ingredients to fill in the gaps. And I actually have a little list at the end of this, and I'm not, if anyone wants, Teresa will post a pantry list that I have. That I think would be a really good start. I mean, you all have pantries already, but if you kind of want to pare things down, or I'm a big advocate for not having too much stuff, and space is a real thing too. So I can just give you what I would recommend for a well-stocked pantry that would help then you can make a meal with those pork trotters that you have, if you have the right grains and canned things on hand. Another thing you can do at home is to preserve what you can. So let's go to the next slide. Preserving sounds kind of daunting sometimes, especially to people who have a million things going on and kiddos and a bunch of tomatoes on their counter or whatever. It just can be a huge task. There are a lot of ways that you can preserve and not waste, and it's okay, we've all to throw things away. I don't think my grandmother ever threw anything away. She somehow survived after eating things that were in her fridge for a very long time. I think everyone's immune systems were better a while back. But maybe if we eat enough preserved things, that will help ours too. So canning, that's something I really want to get into. I mean, we're starting to do it at the restaurant right now too. And actually, when I was visiting my great aunt Shirley, she gave me a few of my great grandmother's canning jars that were out there on the farm. So I know that's something that women in my family have been doing, and Shirley shared her book about canning with me too. That's something that's really cool. You kind of have to have some time to do that though. And so if you don't have time, it's okay. There are other ways to preserve things, or get together with friends like women used to do, to have a canning party. I'm actually trying to rope my mom into that, and maybe anyone else who wants to join me at the restaurant at the end of harvest to can a bunch of stuff that we can use throughout the winter. Drying is another really huge thing, and I know there was just a talk about how to dry foods just a couple of weeks ago. The herbs that I used to make the tea that you all had today were hung. They were just hung up from a pole, and they were dried. Nothing fancy about it. No special equipment. I just hung a bunch of herbs. And I also used those same herbs to make the ash that was on the little lardo bite. So there are all sorts of, I won't go into detail about drying. You can also use scraps, like I saved the little what was I putting on your crackers? The wild plums. I saved the little pits from those, and I'm going to use those to make wild plum vinegar. The salad there was seasoned with wild grape vinegar, and there I used wild grapes from this area and made a vinegar out of that. All you need is a little mother, and I'm not going to go into the technical details, but you can Google it or we can chat later. Another thing, you can ferment or pickle, and all you need for that is some salt. You can get into fancy pickling if you want with all sorts of seasonings or sugars or whatever, but really all you need at the end of the day is salt. And I will say, I'm not sponsored by this brand, but my favorite brand of salt is Diamond Crystal Kosher Salt. So if anyone has access to that, I highly recommend it. That's what we use at the restaurant. Talk to any chef and they would say the same probably. Oh, and then freezing, that's also a form of preservation. Like herbs, you can chop up a bunch of herbs, mix them with a little bit of oil, put them in your freezer, and then scoop out a little chunk as you need it and in the winter, and there you're good to go. You've got beautiful herbs to season a pasta or a grain dish or anything. And leftovers. Just using leftovers is also a form of sustainable preservation. So you can, if you're into batch cooking, that's what that is. So let's go to our next slide. So this all sounds like a lot. And if you start to think about all the ways that you might be wasting things, or that you could save more or do more, it gets to be a little bit overwhelming. And who has time for all of that? Or the resources? Because some of the, buying a bunch of canning jars and buying a bunch of kitchen equipment is an investment. It can be expensive. And even shopping local, if you don't have things that are growing in your yard, that can all add up too. So how can we think about this that is really realistic for wherever you're at in life? I think that really focusing on grains, different starches, thinking about how to get creative with those, that's a huge start. Love your grains and your legumes, that's like beans or lentils, and offcuts. So the more variety that you can come up with here, the farther your pantry and all your exciting items will go. So you can, another example, with corn, ground corn that's dried at the end of the harvest. Grind it, you can make polenta, you can make grits. There are all sorts of things you can do with ground corn, and I know there's a lot of corn around here. Grains, good breads, all of those things are things that will stretch other ingredients out. Doing sauces that have a little bit of meat in them that you can freeze and use later. That is another way to kind of really stretch things. Using animal fats, like I already mentioned, that's another, you could have a meatless meal sometime and use animal fat to cook it. And that still is going to be a little better for you with more nutrients than if you didn't have that. And I think that really, if you are cooking this way, it really is more affordable in the long run, but it takes kind of a whole switch. You just have to think about things differently. You also have to know your storage situation. Not everyone has a huge pantry space or a big freezer. There's zero pantry space almost in my home. But if you do, then you can kind of plan for how much space you have for storing things, and then if it makes sense to dry or freeze. And then I would say invest in tools that you need, but you don't need to go crazy here. I also have a list of tools that I recommend. If you're kind of getting started on some of these things, I have a list that I think would be helpful, and is pretty doable too. There are a lot of people who want to sell you a lot of things out there that have very specific uses. I don't like things like that. I like things that can do a lot of different things. So that can be another list I'll send later, or that Teresa will post. Bottom line, I think the key to this is just doing what you can in the moment, not feeling bad about what you can't do. Learn something new, try different combinations, keep learning, talk to neighbors, do things with people, and then as you're able, add more layers, but don't beat yourself up about what you're not currently doing. There's always going to be more that we could do. And let's go to the next slide. And this is not just a pitch for my restaurant here, but the cool thing is if you're eating simply like this, maybe if you have a couple meatless meals a week with grains and legumes, if you're really stretching everything, then when you do go out, you can go to a restaurant where they practice these same things too. And you can go there knowing that the food you're eating is good for your body and that they're supporting farmers who are really working hard to do things the right way. And in the end, we all want to be supporting those things. So that's one way of thinking about it, just to be calculated in where you do eat out. And obviously, we all need a good Culver's run every now and then, or something like that. But my dad is saying yes back in the back corner. But anyway, bottom line, having higher standards, having standards that are higher than you really can achieve or afford at any point is not worth it. If it costs you your joy, if you're feeling too guilty, or if it comes in the way of you being present in your relationships, anything like that. But I really do think that all these things are more doable than they might first appear. Many of you are already practicing much of this right now, and I really do believe there's more joy in cooking and eating this way. I mean, our great-grandmothers certainly thought so. So anyway, that's all I have right now. There are a couple more slides that have those lists if you want to tab through. I know we're a little bit, we're right at 7, but I just wanted to leave a little bit of time if anyone has questions for me or anyone here. Yes.
I have a question. Some of us eat out a lot.
Yeah.
So where is your restaurant?
Well, you're gonna have to move to St. Paul.
Well, no, drive to St. Paul.
Okay. My restaurant is in Highland Park. It's between St. Kate's and St. Thomas.
Oh, okay.
And it's not too bad of a drive. You can just pop over on 394. And we're open Wednesday through Saturday. We do only whole animal butchery at Myriel, and really almost all of our animals are from here, Dassel-Cokato or Hutchinson, except for our ducks. Those we get from Pequot Lakes, but he's a great guy. But yeah, so we are practicing these things as much as we can. And there are other places, but I know that, for example, Bait and Hook buys their hens from Dan and Becky's market and other things. There are a lot of people who, in different increments, try to support local farmers. But yeah, come to Myriel. And if you come to Myriel, say hello though. Make sure you say hello.
Get the potatoes.
Yeah.
Bring your friends.
Any other questions? Yes.
Do you have like an offcut that has become your favorites?
Ooh, that's a great question. It's funny, I had to actually think about what an offcut is though now, because my brain is switched. We just smoked beef heart at the restaurant. We cured it like you might cure pastrami, and then smoked it, not even in a big smoker, just in a little perforated pan over the stove with some wood chips in it. And I think that's really delicious. Yeah, heart, tongue, those things are really great. We use our pig heads to make head cheese, which sounds disgusting. I don't know who came up with that term, but all it really is the muscles, and there are a lot of muscles in a pig's head. And you cook it, you brine it first, it removes any impurities in blood, and then you cook it for a really long time until it's tender, and then you pull all the muscles out and you chop finely. You can use the ears, some of the cartilage will break down, so it's nothing chewy or gross. There's no brain in there, nothing weird about it, but no errant teeth or anything like that. And then it really becomes this delicious kind of, I don't even know what to call it. I mean, it's like you can shape it and then slice it, and it's like the best bologna you've ever had. So those are a couple of my favorites. Oh, duck heart also. For those of you who hunt, use those duck hearts, stockpile them, and then you can grind them up. And I've actually made, anyone has ever had wild rice hamburger hot dish out here? Yeah? Use duck hearts instead of ground beef. Try that sometime. It's delicious. Yes?
What's so good about diamond kosher sauce?
Diamond kosher, I'm so glad someone asked me so I can talk about that. Diamond kosher salt, I really like how it dissolves. Sometimes when you get kosher salt, it's really kind of chunky, and it's it's easy to oversalt things because by the time it dissolves, you're like already overboard. So I just think it's really versatile for any like fermentation projects when you're using a lot of salt, or if you just are seasoning your food as you're cooking. It just dissolves really, really well.
Is that what was on the popcorn, or what you kind of put on the popcorn?
No, my mom actually brought that because I forgot popcorn. I forgot fine salt. She brought her own popcorn salt. So you'll have to ask my mom what that was. But the popcorn, yeah, there was just salt and dry aged pork fat. Any other questions?
We talked about the health version of the oils and the lard and all that stuff as far as
Yeah.
heart healthy or.
Well, I think so. I mean, fats are always, that's been such a changing story, I just think for a long time people were afraid of eating lard, and I am not a doctor, I'm not a nutritionist. I'm sure probably some of you could answer that. Becky probably could answer this question better than me. But I think that using things that are more natural in general and go through less processes are just better for you. I can't give you a scientific reason why, but it makes sense to me, and it certainly has to many generations before us. And when I'm talking about using animal fats, they're animals that I have butchered, and we've rendered ourselves. We know exactly how they were raised, and we're not doing any weird processes to the fats. Like when you buy the chunks of lard in a store, it's gone through some stuff. But so I'm talking about animal fats that just come from cooking or that we have intentionally rendered down just in a pot of water. And I think that, obviously eating a lot of fat is not great for heart health, but I think that using good fats like that, when you need to use fat, makes a lot more sense than stuff that's been highly processed.
So with that, what would you recommend then for like healthy cooking oils? Like besides like maybe an animal fat?
Yeah. There's people are kind of changing their tune on that right now, especially with the seed oils, different processes. I still think, for cooking certain things, you need to have a neutral oil, or like frying things. There's certain kinds that have different smoking points that you want to avoid. But I try to use as much butter or animal fat as I can. And then, I don't know, Becky, do you want to chime in on what you would recommend right now? Not to put you on the spot or anything.
Probably a little more refined coconut oil, but not hydrogenated.
Yes.
Then there's no flavor.
Right.
And you have a higher smoking point. There's still debate on avocado oil.
Yeah.
That's still used some, but you don't want to use high heat with olive oil.
Yeah.
So basically, I don't use any seed oils anymore except for maybe a little bit of avocado once in a while.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's coconut or animal fat.
Yeah. And animal fats are great for frying things too, like potatoes cooked in duck fat, for example. At the restaurant, we have duck fat is great, pork fat is great for frying things. Yes.
So I just feel it's hard to go back, but I'm a nutritionist, and just with this stuff, kind of the rule of thumb is if it's this in nature, it's the best choice.
Okay.
So because if you think of any oil that's not in nature, or we have to do to it to make it that state,
Okay.
the more things are added to it.
Okay.
That's helpful.
That makes sense.
And then the fat heart thing, just so you guys know, that whole myth, that's a hypothesis or a myth that's been debunked like the last 10, 15 years. So the whole study that fat is related to heart disease, with good fat, it's not true. It's just really that simple. But they're complicated because it's been around for so long, and it's hard to let go of that. And there's obviously still, doctors that think that, and it's really hard. There's some information out there, but it's more related to like sugar that causes inflammation to cause and seed oils or vegetable oils. Yeah.
So you might think that you're being really healthy by eating a salad,
Or something
but
that's low fat, right?
Right. Yeah. But it's actually, yeah.
So sorry.
Well, thank you. No, I'm glad. I'm so glad. Thank you for speaking up. Yeah. Yes.
I just have a question. I'm new to using that pork fat lard.
Yeah.
My mother-in-law rendered it for me.
Uh-huh.
And when I went to use it the first time, it seemed like it really had a smell that I wasn't used to. Is there something I've done wrong? Or is there a way to match? The next time I used it, I did a portion of that and a portion of butter and some buns. They turn out just like those. They were
Amazing.
fine.
Yeah.
But I can't remember what it was, but my daughter was like, I'm not making this because she's so not used to that smell. So that's just normal.
Well, it is. There's always going to be a bit, which is why when you get the blocks of lard in a store, see those, that's why they say deodorized. They've figured out a fancy way to get rid of that. And there are some tricks that you can use, some processes, but basically, so when we render our pork fat down, I try to keep the two kinds of fat separate. There's the leaf lard along the, I won't demonstrate it myself. I also don't think I have any leaf lard. But there's a leaf lard that's along the kidneys. That's the really hard white stuff. And that's like what I really love using in making pie crust, for example. When it solidifies, it gets really hard. And that, I've noticed, has less of an odor. But for example, if you're just, you're breaking down a hog and you're trimming off the back fat, or you're using more of the trimmings, that fat is a little bit softer, and when you render that down, and by the way, if anyone doesn't, rendering is basically just, you can just pop all the fat in a thing of water and boil it and stir it until the little skin pieces start to stick on the bottom and the water is evaporated and you're left with fat. So that's what we're talking about. I assume everyone here knows that. I'm not trying to, but just in case. I know my dad doesn't know that back there. So sometimes if that process is, if it's cooked a little bit too long, then it'll actually start to cook some of the other like meat pieces or skin pieces, and then that will make the fat taste even stronger. The other thing I would add is, this is where your sourcing really comes into play too. Animals that are raised really well, and I'm not saying that one wasn't, but
it's a relative of the ones that you
amazing. Well, and I find, but that's good then. Then you can trust that it's not some weird stress hormone that you're tasting. So if you're working with fat from an animal that was really raised really well, you just have to sort of, I think that was a really brilliant strategy to cut that with butter so that your daughter would be used to eating it, and maybe bit by bit.
It wasn't so much eating it once it was done, it was more working with it.
Oh, just smelling
it.
it.
was just a new thing we
Yeah.
were used to. And I just didn't know if I
Yeah.
was doing it wrong.
Yep. Nope. That sounds all right. But yeah, there have been a few batches of rendered pork fat that I've opened in the restaurant where I can tell that it just was cooked too long, and so it smells like cooked pork at that point. Which in some things would be great, like that popcorn.
So I'm gonna have to try rendering, but are there sometimes like with the bacon, I just kind of pour off the fat, and are there any downsides to just skimming fat on the things like this? Is there for the lazy cook?
No, I mean, yeah, that's because a lot of, when you're cooking a piece of meat that has a lot of fat on it, you do get a lot of fat. I would just say if it's a piece of meat that you're cooking or a piece that has been cured, or, just maybe use it faster than you would. If you have a pristine tub of lard that you have rendered down, it can last for quite a while if you've cooked it long enough and you've removed any particles that might be in there. But something that has gone, it's coming off a piece of cooked meat and has been in a pan, or it was from bacon that has had cure on it, I would just maybe use it a little bit faster. But yeah, that's great that you're doing that.
If you buy lard, because I'm one person, I'm not going to buy a hog and render those.
Right. Why am I not?
Anyway, so what would you buy? You go to a specific store, like a Whole Foods, is that better than a Lund's or a Colburn's, or how do you know what to buy?
So if you are, let's say, there are a couple different ways you could go about it. If you go to some sort of a co-op or maybe a Whole Foods or something, ask them for their rendered lard. Any place that has a butcher there, or is working closely with butchers, then you can, oftentimes they'll have a little tub of rendered lard, in their meat section.
Okay.
But I would just avoid, and I've certainly gotten this myself in a pinch, but the boxes of lard, that if you want to avoid those types of, if you're oil conscious, that will have more stuff that you're not looking for. But the other thing is talk to farmers, and see if what they do with their fat.
Yeah.
Sometimes I've needed more lard to make a bunch of pies, and because we only do whole animal butchery at the restaurant, I'm running out of lard. So I'll talk to the farmer I know who might have a broken down hog, and then I'll get some of their fat from them that they froze or something, and I'll render that. I realize I'm putting a lot of pressure on farmers who are in this room, sorry. Your demand is going to go like this. Yes.
Can lard be canned, like ghee, or, can it be heated and put in a...
I would imagine, I've never done it.
Preserved in a jar?
Yeah, I'm sure because you use heat in the process, of rendering it, and so I can't see why not. Has anyone done that in this
I've
room?
frozen it.
Yeah. And it just honestly, even just refrigerated, it stays for quite a long time too. But yeah, I think that would be if I had more canning space, there it is, knowing your limitations. I don't have much pantry space, so I haven't done that yet.
It'll keep a couple months in the fridge normally, and
Yeah.
freezer a couple of years really.
Yeah, it's durable. Yes.
So I love the asparagus. I loved everything.
Oh.
Obviously, the Lord bless you. You're gifted.
Thank you.
So the recipe.
Yes. Yeah. So the asparagus that you had today was just fermented with a little bit of salt. That salt that I was talking about. So what I did with that, I weighed the asparagus and just enough water to cover the asparagus, and then I took that weight and then I figured out what 3% was of that weight, and then added that in salt, and let it sit out on the counter for about a week, and then all you have to do is open the can to know that it's fermented at that point, and or the container, the glass jar, and at that point I put it in the refrigerator. So it's a very low maintenance way of preserving things. It works great on tomatoes too.
What about beets?
Oh yeah, yeah. Yep, just try it on everything.
3% kind of formula?
Yeah, 3% is sort of maybe that would be something that I'll put up, give to Teresa, give you the math on that. But yeah, 3%, it kind of depends on what you're doing. Like that one, I think I could have done a little bit less salt. Some things that are like a beet, for example, you want a little bit more that's really dense. There's a lot of water in asparagus, and some things just don't need as much. Yes.
Do you have to get like a hog from a federally inspected?
To serve it at a restaurant, yes. There needs to be, technically, this is the law in Minnesota, there needs to be a USDA inspector on site. But you can do whatever you want.
No, we own a catering business.
Oh, sure. No, so then you can't really.
So no, we do it from a federally.
Right.
But we do try always source local and as
Yeah.
much as we can. So we've gotten, we've been a big part of the sustainable farming. Of
Cool.
SFA.
Cool.
So.
Have you noticed it's hard to get skin on hogs? A lot of people don't scald hogs anymore, which is such a bummer because you can use that for so much. But yeah, the processors, a lot of processors in Minnesota have just said we're not doing that anymore. I refuse. I don't like getting hogs without the skin on. So, but yeah, so there are some challenges like that, but it's I don't know. There are a lot of people doing really cool things and raising great products.
Why do you like the skin?
Why do I like the skin? Yeah, well, you can, for one, you can actually cook it down and include that in if you're making sausages. If you cook it down enough and grind it up, and then use that in your sausage emulsification, I'm getting a little technical here right now, it actually gives it a better emulsification. And you would never notice that you don't see like pieces of skin or anything. But it just, it really helps, almost like a binding agent. And you can also cook it until it's kind of more tender, and then scrape off all the fat off the back, cut it into little shapes, let it dry out, freeze it, or let it dry out and put it on your shelf, and then fry those, and those are chicharrones. Really good little chips. And for those of you who are gluten-free, it's a great substitute for a cracker. And also, for those of you who are gluten-free, sorry, wasn't super friendly to you today. Yes?
Can you tell us what was in the bean dish?
The bean dish, yes. So those were black beans and red winter wheat from Hutchinson, Glen Cattleback. And I toasted the wheat and then cooked it like you would, like a porridge or something. and until they were tender. And then I pickled a little carnival squash from Dan and Jane Nyquist. Yeah, little. So I didn't cook the squash. I just cubed it and did a pour over pickle, which is really simple: vinegar, water, a little salt. And then there was a cucumber in there and parsley, the one thing that grew on my deck garden this year. So that was my parsley. When you're a chef, you're not able to be at home to take care of those things. Sorry, vegetables. Yes, Jane.
I know that you have been asked by the Wall Street Journal to get some recipes.
Yeah.
Are they has that printed yet?
One of them has, and it's actually a recipe that probably many of you have had. I call it picnic chicken. I don't know what other people around here call it, but it's what my great aunt Shirley and grandmother would make at any family gathering. Basically, chicken dredged in with a skin on and bones, dredged in flour, browned in butter, and finished in the oven. So it's not like Southern fried chicken. I did that, and then a recipe for hearty late summer greens with a buttermilk dill dressing. And that was in last weekend Wall Street Journal. So a lot of people have been hearing about this area and our food traditions here.
Thank you. What's your clientele like? I mean, how many do you serve a day or?
Yeah. Well, the restaurant can hold up to about 38 people at once, and it's a really busy night if we do, I'd say a normal night would be close to anywhere between 50 and 70 people, so we can usually have 2 seatings. And it's a whole combination of people from the neighborhood, occasionally people from out here will come to visit, and then also we're close to the airport, so we get a lot of folks who will come from the airport too. Yeah, it's just a tiny little restaurant. Yes.
Karyn, would you explain the name of your restaurant?
Oh, sure. Yeah, Myriel. Well, everyone who comes to the restaurant asks me. Well, not everyone. So many people ask me, "Are you Myriel?" I'm not Myriel, but Myriel is one of my favorite characters from a book, Les Miserables. Also a play, a musical. He's the bishop at the beginning who invites Jean Valjean, who just got out of prison. He invites him in to his home when everyone else has rejected him, and he's about to sit down. The bishop is about to have a meal, and when this guy comes in to the door, he tells a list of all the bad things that he's done. He's like, "No, really, do you know who I am?" And the bishop, his only response is to put even more silverware on the table, like he would for a very dignified guest. And so I just really love, and then more happens in the story. This man doesn't know how to receive his love. He ends up stealing his silver and is intercepted by the police, and when they bring him back, the bishop says, actually, this was a gift. This man was a friend. And then he asks the man to use that kindness to change his life. And so I just love the picture of grace in that story, and then also hospitality and really showing people love and kindness over a well-set table. And I always cry when I talk about it. Yes.
Do you find any extra influence from immigrants coming from a lesser, maybe eating lesser processed food?
Yes, actually. So when we were, a couple of years ago in the pandemic, that whole thing, when processors were so backed up and people didn't know what to do with their hogs, I partnered with the Sherpings and we bought 4 hogs together, and Clint and Amanda Sherping, and he made a temporary butcher table and set it up on his driveway, one by one, and I brought a few of my cooks we had nothing else to do at that time. We went out there and one by one he shot them, bled them on a skid loader, and then we broke these 4 hogs down in one day, And anyway, sorry, this is a long way of answering your it's a story, a good one. But anyway, I told people in the city that we were going to be butchering these hogs. Would anyone be interested in some meat? And it was really interesting. There were a bunch of Ecuadorian and Mexican cooks who weren't able to get unemployment at the time, and they said, yes, we'd love some, and they would take anything. I talked to a group of African immigrants, and they said, yes, we'd love some, we'll take anything. And then I talked to a lot of people who are, lived in the city, have had means, and I told them, they said, yes, we'd love some pork. I'd like the loin, I'd like some spare ribs, and I'd like this and this. And it wasn't because they were trying to be snobby about it, it's just they didn't know what to do with the other parts. And many of them hadn't grown up on farms or other things. And so I just thought it was really interesting that it was just the clearest that I've ever seen that, I think. And so I've loved working with, actually I'm having an Ecuadorian chef to my restaurant next week. She has a restaurant in Quito, Ecuador, and she's coming up to Myriel to do a dinner next Tuesday. And so I would love to I'm hoping to kind of get some more collaborations like that, and I want to learn from people who have long-standing traditions. I can learn about it and start using everything, but it was really special to learn from people who don't have to tell themselves to be excited to eat pig feet. They're just naturally excited because their grandma made it and their mom made it and they did this, So I think we have a lot to learn. Well, you can teach us all then too. Yeah, that's amazing. Were they pickled? Oh, so cool. Anyone else here like pig feet? Yeah, nice.
My grandma made it all the time.
Oh, that's so cool. And is it something now?
Chilled in the morning for breakfast.
Chilled in the morning for breakfast. And what was it served with?
For homemade bread.
That sounds fantastic. That's amazing.
Well, you just have to try. What's the texture? It's like jelly on top.
Yeah. That is the.
Bay leaves and.
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain it. It's meaty actually.
Yeah. There's a lot of meats there. Yeah.
You just have to get past the meat thing.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. That's where it's really a lot of it for younger generations, I think. People who didn't have that from their grandmother, you have to just kind of think, okay, there are a lot of other people who enjoy this in the world. So maybe I can learn to appreciate it, especially if I know that it's a good reason that I'm eating it, because it's less wasteful. And then it also becomes sort of for me, I realized that there were a lot of things that I didn't grow up eating that I kind of recoiled at, but I felt that that was actually pride in me for not being willing to try something that so many other people love and cherish. It doesn't mean that we have to like everything. My dad, for example, has really branched out since I've been a chef, and he still doesn't naturally like everything, but he'll try it, and he sees the value in it. But yeah, texture is a big thing, I think, for a lot of, yeah.
They made a lot of kidneys and rice too.
Oh yeah.
So, and that's a very.
Oh yeah. Kidneys, liver, yep. Very distinct. You can't not smell that. Yeah. Yeah.
So do the pork processing places, do they throw this stuff away, do you think, or do they process it out?
I actually, yeah, so when when we work together for a hog, I'll talk with the other animals. I'll talk with either the farmer or the processor and ask them to set aside certain organs, just because they assume for a lot of people that that's just not a normal thing. People don't want those.
You can get them ground into your meat too. Some butchers will do that, will ground in like the organ meats into your ground meat.
Yeah.
So, kind of tames it down a little bit.
Yeah.
if you want to get some.
And if you really can't get into liver, like beef liver, for example, you can cut it and dry it out, and it makes great dog treats. Sustainable dog treats. Well, any last ones? I think I want to be mindful of time for everyone.
Sure, yeah, and I know Karyn has to get back to the cities too, so, you'll have to let us know when your sustainable cooking show is on. So thank you again. It's a real treat to have you here and present that to us.
It was.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
One thing about a note about the plates and cups and forks and napkins, they're all compostable, so if you could just put them in the blue bin over there, just put it in a pile and compost it in our place. And feel free, to use the jar, but you can take if anyone wants to use the calendula and the sage, you can take that. All right. So if anyone wants to